Hi, I am J.E. Prazzi, a speculative fiction writer and the author of the Malfunction Trilogy and the Raven Tree Society. This is exploratory fiction. It is the beginning of the month. Last week was an off day. I kind of decided to get some rest because I ended up getting sick. So instead of trying to figure something else out, I just went ahead and took the day off. So we are back for April. Normally I would have a guest on the first 2 weeks in a month, but it just didn't work out this time. So this is the first time I'm doing a book chat all by myself. I'd love it if you guys want to pitch in with any thoughts. So I am talking about Anna Karenina today, and this is going to end up backwards on the camera. So you're just going to have to trust me on this one, that this huge book I'm holding is Anna Karenina. It is by Leo Tolstoy, so it's a Russian classic. I haven't read a ton of Russian classics, but every Russian classic that I've read, I've completely adored. So it's been a while since I read this. Forgive me, I'm sure I'm going to butcher the names if I remember all of them. But this is one of those stories that even though the characters are really vivid and strong and realistic, you can get through and understand it quite well without having to catch character names very much, because this book is just so rich with the themes and the story. So we're going to talk about this week. We're going to talk about it from a reader perspective. I want to kind of give you my reader's take on it. It is going to be full of spoilers, so if you ever want to pick up Anna Karenina, I would suggest going ahead and skipping this video. And then next week, we're going to be discussing the book from an author perspective. I'm going to talk to you guys about how Anna Karenina has impacted my writing and what lessons we can learn from it. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump into it. So I feel like this one, out of everything that I've talked about so far, kind of deserves a little bit of front loading so you guys know what's going on. I know there's probably quite a few people who have read this or some other Russian classics. They're classics for a reason. But if you're not really big into the Russian classics and you're watching this anyways, this is basically the story of three marriages. So we open up with the first couple. The husband has been cheating on the wife, and it's a very unhappy marriage. She's trying to decide whether to stay or to leave. And then our main character comes on the scene. That's Anna Karenina. She is the sister of the cheating husband, and she goes in to convince her sister-in-law to stay with her husband. And we kind of get an introduction to Anna, our main character. And then the second marriage we're discussing is actually Anna Karenina's marriage to her husband. And that is the central driving point of the entire story, because Anna ends up being adulterous to her husband herself. She falls in love with a young man, Vronsky, who is a military man, and it's just this like whirlwind of a just sordid love affair. She doesn't have very much love for her husband. He's much older than her, and he's just kind of this like flat, unpassionate, boring man. She has one son with him, but she's just bored in her marriage. She doesn't feel any love. She doesn't feel any support from him. So when she starts to have these actual emotions for this guy, it very quickly runs off the deep end. And the third marriage we're talking about isn't until actually the end of the story, and that is, I almost feel like he's at least equal in main character status, if not more so, and that is, hold on, let me check, the Levin. I almost said Lenin because I knew who was close, but no, not that guy. Konstantin Levin, and he in the beginning of the book, he asks a young woman to marry him. Her name is Kitty. She's one of my favorite female characters in all literature. he asks Kitty to marry him, and Kitty is kind of this airheaded young girl at the time, and she's actually in love with Vronsky. And Vronsky, being a young military guy, he kind of hops around from woman to woman, but she was expecting him to ask her to marry him. So she was kind of waiting on him, and she turned down Levin. And then she sees the interest that Vronsky takes in Anna, and he completely leaves off any interest in Kitty and starts pursuing Anna. But throughout the course of the book, Levin is searching for happiness. He lives out in the country. He's a farmer. He begins to search for it in all these different places, with working with the field hands, with, trying the simple life and trying the city life. And he's this brilliant character, brilliantly written. But as he's kind of searching for things, it takes a strong spiritual side as well. And as he starts to try and search through religion and the different types of religions available, the different perspectives of religion, to try and understand happiness. And eventually he ends up marrying Kitty. She goes through this whole arc and ends up falling in love with him. They have a very happy family. And that their marriage is kind of in complete contrast to Anna and her husband. So over the course of this book, and that's why I'm saying Anna is there's a reason why it's called Anna Karenina and not Konstantin Levin or The Three Marriages. Anna ends up in this social disgrace, being found out. She tells her husband that she's cheating on him. He ends up forgiving her, but she has Vronsky's child, and they end up getting divorced. And then she marries Vronsky, and then in the end, she's just scarred so much by this entire ordeal that she ends up committing suicide. And I think that's actually one of the most interesting things about this book for me. It's not the suicide aspect, but in the beginning of the book, when Anna Karenina first comes to visit her brother and his wife, the Oblonskys, and that's kind of the couple in the middle. They're still married, but it's a very unhappy marriage because the husband is just, going around and doing whatever he wants and leaving his wife and their multiple children to just, go around to different women. But when Anna first visits them, as she's getting off the train and onto the at the train station, there's actually a train worker who falls off the platform and in front of the train, and he ends up being run over by the train. And that, in the end, is how Anna ends up committing suicide, as she jumps in front of a train. So the main bulk of the story is kind of end capped in either side by death in front of a train. And it's very interesting, Anna's reaction to when that first happens in the beginning of the book, and her horror and her concern over the family, and you can see her kind of loving reaction to that, and her genuinely caring about this man and about his family, to, at the end of the book, her selfish motives and her anger and her desire for revenge, and why she is compelled to commit suicide. So yeah, it's a very, very interesting book, kind of end capped by tragedy, but also in that you also have Levin's arc, and the story actually ends, the very last chapter ends on Levin walking through the fields on his way back to Kitty, his wife, and their newborn child, walking back through the fields and thinking over everything that has kind of happened, especially in his story arc, more so than, in general. But Anna Karenina's story arc does touch that family as well. But as he's walking back through the field, he's kind of thinking about his spiritual journey, and it kind of comes to this place where he's like, I'm not ready to be a Christian. I don't think I'm going to, jump into the church, but perhaps there's more to the spiritual facet than I gave thought to before. So it's a very powerful book. It's a big book. There's a lot that happens. So that's kind of the basic of the story. I know there was a movie that came out with Keira Knightley playing the role of Anna Karenina, which actually I think was beautifully, beautifully cast. And it's a very odd movie because you can see this, huge book with so much happening, and as you can tell from me trying to describe the plot, it's kind of all over the place. So it's hard to make a movie out of. So when they did it, they cut off a whole bunch of things, but they kind of turn it into this play. So there'll be the characters walking through one set to another set, and you'll do these scene changes and these huge time jumps by, the characters just kind of walking by, or the set changes behind them, or there'll be like curtains falling, and at first it was very distracting and I didn't like it at all, but towards the end it actually worked out quite well. I'm not going to say I love the movie and it's the greatest adaptation ever, but it tells the story well enough. Like it gives importance to the important parts, and there are a few scenes that are just brilliantly shot, especially between Anna Karenina, Keira Knightley, and Vronsky. So it's definitely worth checking out if you're interested in this story. And I'm actually going to put this book up here because I'm going to keep waving around and being irritating. So kind of want to talk first about kind of some of the themes of this book. And as I mentioned before, the book is mostly about these three marriages. And for me, they kind of fall on a spectrum. There's the worst case with Anna Karenina and her unhappy marriage with her husband, turning into a divorce, turning into what starts off as just this fiery romance and love and time of pure bliss with Vronsky, which slowly degrades into jealousy and revenge and hatred towards him as she starts to suspect that he's still womanizing and going around, even though he does love her and he is fully invested in her. It's kind of this thing where, you cheated on this marriage between me and my husband, so how can I trust you in this other marriage? And it's also the weight of society kind of shunning her because she just destroyed her marriage, and back then, of course, this is just this horrifying thing. So we have that marriage on the far end of the spectrum is kind of this horrifying worst case scenario, and then we have a good marriage, which would be between Levin and Kitty, just an example of a marriage well played out, where both characters are whole in themselves. They're not, as people talk about better halves, they're whole people in and of themselves. So when they come into the marriage, it is a complete marriage where each character, each person is developed in and of themselves, so they can offer more of themselves to the other person. And it's just this happy, blissful marriage. It's not full of the fire and passion like Vronsky and Anna, but it's everything that a marriage should be. And then in the middle, we have the Oblonskys, who don't have a huge focus, even though the book starts off with the Oblonskys. They don't have a huge focus. They're kind of just a version of it. Like, these guys never got divorced. They look like a happy marriage on the outside. They have a ton of kids, but it's a very unhappy marriage. And we even have one part where Mrs. Oblonsky is going to visit Anna after the initial divorce, and when Anna is the most happy, and Mrs. Oblonsky goes to visit her and is just talking to her about how jealous she is that Anna had the courage to leave her husband and how she wishes she could do the same. So we kind of have these three marriages kind of spread out on the best to the worst spectrum. And I think that's why this book has been so powerful in my life, because when I first read this, it was towards the beginning of my marriage, maybe 2 or 3 years into marriage. And I think if I had read this before I'd been married, it wouldn't have had quite the impact on me the characters as Tolstoy created them are just so rich and so flawed and so full that each of them seem like real human beings. And you see them kind of go through these conflicts in marriage, and you see there's one line that basically says there's every happy marriage looks the same, but every unhappy marriage is unhappy in its own unique ways. So it's talking about kind of the ideal marriage as Tolstoy would see it. And then there's all these examples of these marriages that are just falling apart because of the selfishness of the people inside of them. I think another one of the themes that really hit home for me was the spirituality as well, the search for spirituality. We have multiple characters, not just Levin, who's looking for spirituality. There's this really strong and powerful theme where Mr. Karenin, Anna Karenina's husband, where he has found out about her unfaithfulness. He's found out that the child she's carrying isn't his. And his reaction to this was to cut off himself even more emotionally from her, if it was even possible, but then also to refuse to divorce her. So she's stuck in this unhappy marriage with this man who despises her, with a child on the way. Vronsky is so just destroyed because he wants to be with her, and they're kind of carrying things on, and Anna Karenina's husband is he's like, do what you want to do, but you're stuck in this marriage with me. You can never leave me and be happy with him. And there's this beautiful point where Anna Karenina is having the child, and she's so distraught, she's nearly dead. And her husband comes to this place in his faith where he is able to forgive her. And it's just beautifully depicted. It had me in tears, and I don't ever cry in books. It had me in tears because his forgiveness wasn't shown as sympathetic, in that he wasn't telling her what she did was right. He wasn't telling her that he wasn't hurt. He wasn't telling her that it was okay. But it was just this acceptance of, I'm not going to take this hurt you've piled on me and put it back on you. Like, it was like, you hurt me, and forgiveness means that I'm going to allow myself to be hurt and not try to push it back on you. And it was this crystallizing moment for me spiritually to read this section of this book and understand exactly what forgiveness was. That forgiveness isn't this, it's been said multiple times by multiple people, the whole idea of, when I forgave, I set a prisoner free and realized that the prisoner with me was me, and those kind of quotes. But in this book, it was kind of depicted as the husband saying, I have been hurt. I have been horribly hurt. And forgiveness is accepting that and allowing it to, taking the hurt and not trying to shield myself from it so that you do not have to be hurt in return. And seeing that kind of nobility in his acceptance and his willingness to continue to love his wife in the sacrificial way, and saying, look, if you want to leave, I'll let you leave. If you want to stay, I want to be the husband I should be. And her reaction to that, and Vronsky's reaction to that, it's just this incredible moment in the book. It happens about halfway through. It's a good chunk of the halfway through the story, and it's just really, really powerful. And it, like I said, it's halfway through, so a lot happens after that that turns that forgiveness around, and that changes his spirituality from being so noble to, he starts getting corrupted by other people, and he starts having anger and rage towards his wife. So it's not this turning moment in that from then on he's just this perfect guy. But it's this turning moment in that we get to see forgiveness, and then we get to see a very realistic point in forgiveness, that it's not, I forgave and it's over. Because he chose to forgive, and then he didn't choose to continue to forgive every day. So that turning point wasn't a solid turning point. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, and kind of how Anna Karenina chooses to be more realistic than it chooses to be a story in the typical storytelling technique. So we don't have the same character arcs that we'd see in other books. But yeah, the theme of spirituality, and particularly Christianity, in these stories is in this book is just, it's incredible. And it's, when it's portrayed, it's not preached. It is shown throughout the characters, throughout the choices. And the final one is kind of Levin's story and the finding happiness, both him and Kitty, as they're kind of dealing with their emotional destruction at the beginning of the book, of Levin of being turned down, and Kitty of losing Vronsky, where she intended to be marrying Vronsky, and turned down this great guy for that, and then realized her mistake. And both of them had to heal from that and become whole people in and of themselves before they stepped into marriage. But there are so many stories that would take this storyline and really mess it up. I think Disney is very commonly addresses this storyline of, be happy and accept yourself, and in this book it's very much the opposite of that. Today's culture says happiness is about thinking highly of yourself and not thinking bad thoughts about yourself, or being strong in who you are, finding your identity, and all those types of things. And in this book, as I think is true, Tolstoy depicts happiness is not thinking better of yourself, but thinking about yourself less, not focusing your world around yourself. And when Levin was able to kind of step outside of this obsessiveness of staying behind closed doors and shunning the world, and because he's very much an introvert, which is probably why I connected to him so much. But when he was able to step past that and start, especially when he was working with field hands and seeing the way they live their lives, and seeing their self-sacrifice and their love for their family, and how stable they were in who they were without having to be rewarded for that. I think that it's such a strong message that is so rarely preached these days. Like I said, we have the Disney Channel version of it, which is, accept yourself, and you're amazing, and you're incredible, and everything's about you. And we've seen how that has let this generation down. But in this story, happiness comes from choosing to put yourself aside and taking care of everything else first, taking care of the people you love. For Levin, that came from taking care of his brother as his brother was dying, taking care of Kitty, building his house, building his family. So yeah, very, very powerful messages. Another thing that I think is really unique about this book, like I said, it turns away from most conventions of storytelling. And if you get a book this big, it's hard to have a typical 3-act structure. I think you could probably break down each marriage as kind of its own storyline and break those down a little bit more, but they do interweave so much, and not as much as you would think they did. Like, there's this way in which they each support themselves and contribute to each other, but but it's not like, Kitty is sitting down with Anna Karenina and like talking through all this girl stuff and helping her make her big decisions, or that, Kitty and Levin at the end are like, oh, look how Anna Karenina turned out, and let's not be like them. Like, it's not like these couples are learning from each other. They interact and kind of bounce off each other because they're in the same social spheres, but they're their own independent things. So there's not this typical story structure to it. So especially, I think, because of movies, because of TV these days, have a 3-act story structure, we've come to look at stories as being kind of all the same way, that there's the opening part where something kicks the character into action, and then the character goes on some sort of journey, whether it's an emotional journey like a growing up kind of story, or whether it's, let's go defeat the bad guys, and then you hit that middle point where the character changes their character arc and decides to try things a new way, and then you hit the climax where the action all coalesces as one, and then you have the big action set piece or the big emotional set piece, and then the story ends. And we're all so familiar and comfortable with that, I think, because television has impacted our culture so much, that this book kind of comes across as a shock, because it doesn't do that. Most classic books don't do that, but I think this even more so. It kind of shuns these ideas of typical story. So in a typical story, we focus on a character arc where a character learns something and they're a different person at the end than they were at the beginning. And in some ways that is true of this. We see Levin and Kitty are both definitely better people at the end than they were at the beginning. And I would even say Vronsky, for instance, is a better person at the end than he was at the beginning. But Anna Karenina is a worse person at the end than she was at the beginning. And so there's definitely character arcs in there, but they're not the focus of the story. The focus of the story is on the themes and the realism. And I think that's the real point here, is the realism in a typical story. When there is a lesson learned or there is a significant change made, we don't turn back and go backwards. But that happens multiple times in the story where, someone will forgive someone, or someone will have a positive life change, or someone will, decide to start doing things a certain way. For instance, we have Kitty at one point starts finding great happiness and great joy in her life by serving sick people. And we're like, oh, here we have this life lesson. And you have this idea of where the story is going because of that. And then Leo Tolstoy is like, nope, that's not how it happens in real life. And then you find out that Kitty couldn't possibly be happy doing that because she was doing that from selfish reasons. So she was only helping people because she was trying to make herself happy, and it was driven by selfish motivations. So therefore, she couldn't find true joy in that. And it's this significant part of the book, and you're like, wait, that doesn't make sense. Like, she's supposed to learn something and then bring that with her into the future. Or, talking about Anna Karenina's husband, who forgives Anna and forgives Vronsky, and then turns around and doesn't forgive them anymore. And you don't see that in character arcs. You see this, like, we come up to this point and we have this great change. I forgive you. And from then on, we have a great relationship. But in real life, it's not like that. In real life, you learn a great lesson and you think you've changed as a person, and then you take another step and you fall on your face again. Or you forgive someone and you think, that's it. Now my marriage is perfect. Now my relationship with this person is perfect because I've learned and I've forgiven and we've gotten past this hump. And then you take another step and you're like, oh, they did it again. And all that forgiveness just disappears. I think that Tolstoy, in breaking the conventions of storytelling, he took away a little bit of that piece that we find in storytelling where the puzzle pieces fit. Most stories, it's escapism where you understand and it's the way it's supposed to be. And we see a character arc. We see people change in a positive way, and they're a better person instead of, I'm better at this and worse at this. Better in this way, not so much in this way. And that's not realistic to people. real people are very complicated. Real situations are very complicated where you can't pull out themes or you can't pull out a moral to the story. And I think that in choosing to tell the story the way that he did, Tolstoy created a greater realism that shuns that escapism and typical storytelling and does it in a way which he teaches you much more. I think if he'd gone for that typical storytelling, for instance, and I know I keep coming back to this because it was one of the most powerful parts of the book for me, if Anna Karenina's husband had forgiven her and been like, do what you want, do what makes you happy, and they'd all gone on their merry way, and it'd been this wonderful, like, Ant-Man-esque family where, the wife is happy with the new husband and they accept the old husband and everyone's great on great terms because, hey, we all forgive them ourselves. But instead we have Vronsky tries to shoot himself in the head because he cannot handle the fact that he's been forgiven for this horrible thing. Anna Karenina wastes away and nearly dies because she feels like she can't leave her husband now that he's forgiven her. Now she hates her new child because it was her daughter was born out of this horrible thing. And then we have Mr. Karenina turn around and like rescind his forgiveness, like, you're not forgiven anymore. So it's not this clean lesson, and I think that that's what makes it so strong as a story, that you can't just pluck out this moral and be like, this means this. You have to really apply yourself to understand what's going on. So yeah, nothing is wrapped up in a bow and nothing is like pretty and perfect at the end. And I think that's, and I'll talk about this more next week when I talk about how this book has impacted me as an author and the writing lessons we can get out of it. But I think that's probably one of the strongest things that I've taken away from this book, in moving forward as an author and as a person, is that this book doesn't preach to you. It doesn't come to you and say, adultery is wrong and it always hurts people and you shouldn't do it, and you should learn to be happy in your marriage. And no, it's very, there's multiple shades. You see how Anna Karenina hurt her husband and hurt her son and hurt her daughter, but you can also feel for her because of the marriage she's in that's so loveless that suddenly she finds real joy, and you're like, I don't agree with what you're doing, but I can see why. And that's through the entire book. You don't get a clean lesson. I think Leo Tolstoy, when he wrote this book, the strongest thing about it, and this is why I call my fiction exploratory fiction, because just as Tolstoy invites the reader to come into this world and explore and think and apply themselves and look at the situation from multiple different perspectives and try and figure it out for themselves, that's how I want my writing to be. I don't want it to be a person opens one of my books and reads through it and says, okay, here's the good guy and here's the bad guy, and this is the clear path, and this is the right and moral choice, because real life isn't like that. And I think that's probably one of the most powerful things about this book, is that it invites you to explore in it. It invites you to think, to apply your brain to search through these moral choices and try to understand it for yourself and see all the nuance and not to just see black and white. So yeah, very, very powerful thing about this book. So yeah, the final thing I kind of want to talk about before I close out, we're kind of running long here. But as I talked about in this book, at the end, Anna Karenina commits suicide. And these days, we've kind of come to what we consider like an enlightened way of depicting suicide in social media. And in media, and because suicide has become such an epidemic, especially in American culture, and it's becoming epidemic younger and younger and younger and younger. The way we speak about it is being critiqued. The way we discuss it is being critiqued. How you can depict it in fiction is being critiqued. And I don't know if people would agree with how Leo Tolstoy approached it in this book. It was kind of the end cap of this incredible story where you are drawn to invest in these characters so much, where you can understand her thought process and you can see it coming. She steps up multiple times and is like, I'm going to leave, I'm going to commit suicide, I'm going to leave, I'm going to commit suicide, and then steps back down and changes her mind. And so you see it coming and you know what's going to happen. And we see her on the train and we see her thoughts of revenge, how she wants to do it where Vronsky, who is then her husband, where she wanted to, or Vronsky would see, where she wanted to do it in a way that it would impact Vronsky, because she believed that Vronsky was committing adultery on her. She wanted to do it in the most horrifying way possible. And she remembered the man who had fallen in front of the train, and she's like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to write this letter. She wrote the letter. She sent it to Vronsky. He got the letter. He was racing to the train station, and we see her thought process the whole way on the train ride. We see her get there, and we are in her head as she jumps on the train track and the train runs her over, and we go through that process with her. And I think in these days, it would definitely be condemned. I would definitely say it would be condemned. When I say that, I'm also thinking about the Netflix series 13 Reasons Why, where they depict the actual suicide of the teenage character. And honestly, I hate that show. I think there's a lot of negative things. And one of the things that psychologists say is not to depict the actual suicide in the fiction. You don't want to see that. And Tolstoy definitely showed us like every thought and every step along the way. And honestly, I'm still not sure how I feel about that. It was the very reason that I'm sitting here and talking about it right now is because it really was emotionally impactful. It left something because these characters feel so real, and because his writing is so powerful. I felt like I was in her body, like I experienced it with her. And it was a very powerful scene. And then seeing everything happen afterwards, I can't say that he did it right, because honestly, I've never been in that mindset where I would seriously consider doing something like that. And I don't know how that would affect someone who is in that mindset if they read this. I guess what I can say for me is that it was so powerful and so impactful because it was the right ending of the story. And he did it brilliantly. And the after effects of it was shown brilliantly. It was not glorified at all. It was not shown as a good thing. Vronsky's reaction to her death, I never thought that I would feel so sorry for a man who wooed a woman away from her husband. But I was heartbroken for him and for his reaction to her death. So yeah, I think, if anyone is going to read this book, they should probably, it's kind of a spoiler to know how it ends, yes, but maybe they should be aware of that, of how strongly it is portrayed. But I think that's probably one of the most powerful aspects of the book, is that Tolstoy he doesn't create fictional characters in here with fictional lives. He creates real people and real struggles and with really hard questions. And and it doesn't leave you in a happy place. And yet when you end it, I think it offers a lot of hope and a lot of substance. So yes, as a reader, that is my thoughts on Anna Karenina. Very powerful book, very powerful story, incredible author. Not for everybody. I definitely want to say that. Not for everybody. Some people are going to be bored out of their skull. And some people probably wouldn't be able to emotionally handle all of it. But if it sounds interesting to you, I would highly suggest picking it up. Next week, we're going to kind of come back to it from an author's perspective. So, yeah, we've been going at this for a while. I'm getting tired and my brain is starting to empty out because I've been talking too much. But yeah, to kind of close out, I released the second episode of the Raven Society last month on the 23rd. If you are interested in horror at all, if you like The Haunting of Hill House, that's kind of the tone that this story has. I also released last month my merch store. So if you are interested in checking that out, that's on my website. I'll leave links below so you can go check it out. I only have one design at the moment, but I'm quite happy with it. I think it turned out really well, and I'm going to be expanding in the future. I'm very eager to see where that goes, and hopefully I'll get a sweater with my Raven Tree logo on it pretty soon. And then this month I'm actually coming up on the anniversary of my first published book, that is Revelation, a prequel novella to the Malfunction trilogy, which also means that this month it'll be 2 years since I first became a published author, which is really exciting for me. So keep an eye out. I'll probably be doing something to celebrate that. I hope you guys will join me. So that's it for now. I'm going to go ahead and end it here. If you want to check out my books or support me in any way, make sure and check out the links below. And I would love to hear your thoughts. If you read Anna Karenina, I definitely want to hear your thoughts on the book in general, about some of the things I brought up. If you are interested in reading it, I would love to answer any questions, hear any thoughts you have, and I definitely want to hear you guys next week as we talk about it from the author perspective. So bye for now, guys.